My name is Jordan Taylor, and I watched my fiancé place a wedding ring on my sister's finger through a computer screen while she wore the very dress I once planned to wear on our own wedding day. Everyone was there, except me. They said there just wasn't room. So, I sat alone in my tiny apartment, raised a glass of wine, and toasted to betrayal. Have you ever been pushed aside by your own family during the most important moments of your life? If you've ever felt that kind of hurt, I'd love for you to share your thoughts below this video. Tap follow and like if you want to walk with me on this journey to uncover the truth. Because the image frozen on that screen that day revealed more than I ever expected. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen after the live stream glitched. My hand clutched the wine glass, eyes locked on that still image. Jason standing beside my father, smiling as if everything was just right, as if my absence was merely a minor inconvenience. I set the glass down and tried to breathe steadily. But inside me everything was shifting, chaotic and loud, memories flooding in without warning, layer after layer like dust stirred in an attic long closed off. I remembered the first time I felt like I didn't belong in this family. I was 11 when my mother died, in a car accident. It happened so suddenly. That morning, she reminded me to finish my breakfast and said she'd take me shopping for a recital dress that evening. By nightfall, a police officer knocked on the door, his face tense, his voice lowering as he mentioned a serious accident. To meet my father was away in a meeting in another city. The one who took me to the hospital to identify her body was our neighbor, Marla. Her hands trembled as she signed the next of kin paperwork. After the funeral, I sat in my mom's old room for hours, holding the unfinished scarf she'd been knitting. I couldn't cry anymore. My tears had dried up by Monday. All I felt was an enormous emptiness and a strange sensation I didn't have words for. Like something essential inside me had vanished with her. 6 months later, my dad introduced me to a special friend named Harriet. She came over in the evenings, bringing lemon pie and a smile that chilled me to the bone. "Hello, Jordan. I've heard so much about you," she said in a sugary voice. I nodded. I already knew. This woman wasn't here to be a friend. She was here to replace someone. A year later, they got married in a small ceremony. I wasn't invited. "I didn't think you were ready to be around a lot of people," my dad said when I asked why. That excuse stuck in my chest like a tiny needle, small but lingering. Harriet moved in, and things started changing. Mom's photos disappeared one by one from the walls. Her things were packed into boxes and moved to the basement. I once overheard Harriet telling my dad, "I think it's time to let go of the past, Richard. Jordan needs to learn that too." Then it was my room's turn. It used to be the one Mom had painted soft blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. One Saturday, after I came home from an extracurricular, I found the walls repainted beige, my bookshelf shoved to the corner. In its place, a crib, a playmat, and several bins of baby toys. I stood frozen in the doorway. Harriet was holding a newborn. No, a baby girl, I later realized, in her arms. "Say hello to your baby sister," she said gently. My dad came in behind her, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're going to be a big sister now, Jordan. It's time to learn how to share." Her name was Madison. From the moment Madison was born, I became a guest in my own home. Family dinners turned eerily silent when I spoke. Every question I asked was met with Harriet's glance, as if I'd disrupted something sacred. By the time I entered high school, I moved in with my grandmother Evelyn, my dad's mother, the only person in the family who still asked, "Are you really okay?" Grandma Evelyn lived in an old wooden house in Bend, Oregon, about a 3-hour drive from where my dad worked. She loved growing lavender, sipping afternoon tea, and reading Agatha Christie. Her smile was warm, and her hands, though a bit shaky, always felt gentle when she smoothed back my hair. With her, I didn't need to try to be seen. I just had to exist. "This house will be yours when I'm gone," she told me when I was 17, her voice steady. "And the sapphire jewelry, too. My mother gave it to me, and now I'll pass it to you." I said nothing, just nodded and hugged her tightly. But she passed away 2 years later from a stroke. I wasn't there when she died. My father signed the medical paperwork, arranged for her to be moved out of the nursing home for end-of-life care at home. I was only informed afterward, when everything was already over. The funeral was small. No relatives from Grandma's side attended. No one mentioned a will. When I asked my dad, he simply said, "She changed her mind before she passed. The house was sold to cover medical costs. The jewelry goes to Madison. She's still young." Ose. I didn't believe him, but I had no proof to fight back. I'd just started my job as an interior designer in Seattle, newly moved out, barely scraping by on rent. I didn't have the strength to dig deeper, nor the knowledge to recognize what a calculated asset grab looked like. Everything really began to shift the day I met Jason. I remember it as clearly as if it were yesterday. It was at a design exhibition in Portland. I was struggling to rebuild a scale model for my booth when a man walked over, wearing a blue shirt, holding a cup of coffee, and smiling. "Need someone to hold the light?" Jason hailed. I still remember how he tilted his head, how warm his voice sounded, and how his eyes looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. He knew more about design than I expected. And more notably, he asked about my family, with just the right blend of curiosity and subtlety. At the time, I didn't see anything unusual. All I felt was comfort. And after years of being treated like a shadow in the background of someone else's new family, I began to believe maybe I'd finally found someone who saw me at the center. But now, staring at the frozen image on my computer screen, Jason slipping a ring onto Madison's finger, I finally understood. Maybe I had never been the center of anyone's story. Not my father's. Not Harriet's. And definitely not Jason's. I saw Jason again the next afternoon, in my kitchen. He unlocked the door with his spare key, carrying a grocery bag like nothing had happened. "I got your favorite ice cream," he said cheerfully. "Real vanilla bean. And white wine, too. Maybe we could open a bottle tonight?" I leaned against the dining table, still gripping the TV remote. The screen behind me was still frozen on the image from last night's wedding. That image felt like a burn that refused to heal, seared into my memory. "Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where were you last night?" He paused for just a second, then gave a soft chuckle. "Chicago, you know that. The investor meeting ran longer than expected. Why?" I didn't answer. I just raised the remote and turned off the TV, then looked straight at him. "Do you know who was standing next to my dad at Madison's wedding?" Jason frowned and set the grocery bag on the counter. "Jordan, what are you talking about? I didn't—" "Don't lie anymore." I cut him off, still holding his gaze. "I saw you. In the live stream. I saw you wearing the navy blue tie I gave you last month. I saw you sitting next to Harriet. You knew that wedding didn't include me. You were there." And no one looked surprised. His face changed in an instant. His eyes darted around as if searching the walls for an excuse. Then he stepped closer and put his hand on my shoulder, just like he always did when I was emotionally shaken. "Jordan," he said softly, "you're tired. Are you sure you're not mistaken? It could have been someone who looked like me. There were hundreds of people there." I pushed his hand away. "I have the photo. I took a screenshot, and I checked the metadata. It froze at the exact moment you stood up to applaud when Madison and Jackson kissed." He went silent. And in that silence, I could hear my heartbeat louder than anything else. After a moment, Jason sighed and stepped back. "All right," he said, the fake remorse fading from his eyes, replaced with a weary look. like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. I didn't have a choice. But I need you to know, what we had, it was real. I sat down in the chair behind me. That line, tired and hollow as it was, still managed to make my chest tighten. I wasn't even sure what part of our story had ever been real. "Why did you come into my life, Jason?" I asked, eyes locked on his. "Who sent you? Was it Richard Taylor?" My father's name came out of my mouth like venom. Jason didn't deny it. He stared at me for a long time, then nodded. "I was introduced through an old friend who works at his company," he said slowly. "At first, it was just to keep the conversation going. They thought you were preparing to contest Evelyn's will. You know, back when you were still upset about the house in Bend, and you agreed to spy on me? It started that way." He lowered his head and rubbed his forehead. "I'm sorry, Jordan. My company was just starting out and needed funding. Richard offered to invest. I thought it would be just a few simple reports. But then I met you, and everything got complicated." I gave a bitter laugh. "Is this the part where you try to tell me a touching story so I'll forgive you?" "No." Jason shook his head. "I'm not expecting forgiveness, but I want you to know after a while I really tried to cut off contact with him. I loved you, I really did. But Richard threatened to pull every dollar out of my company if I stopped keeping tabs. I was trapped. I remembered those nights when he said he had to attend sudden meetings, the days he disappeared with some excuse about meeting strategic partners. The nights I stayed up waiting, thinking I was supporting a man, building a future for the two of us. Turns out that future only existed in my imagination. "You loved me," I whispered, "and yet you sat through a wedding where I was purposely excluded? You loved me, and said nothing when Harriet wore my grandmother's sapphire necklace." Jason didn't say a word, and that silence was the clearest answer of all. I stood up and walked toward the door. "I want you out of my house. Right now." "Jordan." "Right now." He nodded. Without another word, Jason turned around, picked up his bag, opened the door, and left. The door clicked shut behind him, so softly it made me shiver. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time. The groceries he brought still sat on the table, meaningless. The apartment was quiet, like no one else had ever existed in it. I opened my laptop, my mind swirled with unanswered questions. How much did my father know about all of this? Where did Harriet stand in it all? Addison, the baby I once held in my arms. Did she know she was wearing the dress and the ring of the woman who was once her sister? And me? What was I going to do next? But one thing I knew for sure, I wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. Not ever again. The next morning, I woke to a strange kind of emptiness. The apartment felt eerily still, like it too was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. No soft whirring from the coffee maker Jason always switched on early. No lazy morning greetings. Just me and a tangle of thoughts I hadn't sorted yet. I opened my phone. A message from Madison was at the top, just a link, no note, leading to a digital wedding invitation. I stared at the screen. Pale pink background, animated falling confetti, soft piano music playing underneath. The names of the bride and groom appeared in elegant cursive: Madison Taylor and Jackson Price. Jackson Price. I had heard that name before. The Price family had been old business partners of my father's, part of a coastal real estate project years ago. The relationship was dated, but I remembered my grandfather once saying, "The Prices never do anything without doubling their benefit." I scrolled down. The wedding would be held at my father's private estate in Napa Valley, a property over 30 acres wide, complete with a garden, guest house, and helipad. I'd only been there once, almost 8 years ago, for Thanksgiving, and even then I was asked to use the back entrance because the main guests were dining out front. Right below the event details was a small italic note. Due to limited venue capacity, we regret that we are unable to accommodate all loved ones in the traditional way. However, the wedding will be available via high-quality live stream for remote viewing. I read that line over and over, as if by the 15th time it would change and say, "Oops, mistake, of course you were meant to be invited." But it didn't. I knew better than anyone. That flowery language couldn't hide the truth. I'd been deliberately left off the list. I called my father. He answered after the fourth ring. There was hesitation in his voice, like he too had been expecting this call. "Hello? I just got Madison's wedding invitation." Silence. Then, "Yeah, I was planning to call you today. She hasn't even graduated high school yet. Don't you think this is a little soon?" "Madison's ready," he replied quickly. "She's mature for her age. Jackson's a good young man, you'll see." "I won't see anything, Dad," I said. "I wasn't invited." There was a pause. I heard him sigh deeply. "Jordan, I'm truly sorry, but the venue just isn't big enough for everyone. The Price family is large. We had to make tough choices." 12 acres, Dad." I clenched the phone. "A mini golf course, a private winery? And you're telling me there's no room for me?" His voice dropped, tinged with embarrassment. "It was a group decision. You can still watch the live stream. There'll be multiple camera angles. We can wave at each other through the screen." I let out a sharp laugh. "You want me to wave through a screen while my little sister walks down the aisle holding her bouquet?" From the other end, a woman's voice cut in. I recognized it instantly. "Harriet. Half-sister," she said, carefully enunciating each word. I stayed silent, partly stunned, mostly just numb with familiarity. I had heard that word too many times in my life. Half-sister, half-daughter, half-belonging. "You're not the only one," my father added. "Some other relatives are watching remotely too, but we're sending gifts instead. You could record a little video message." Madison would love that. I didn't respond. Inside it felt like layers of my skin were peeling back, revealing wounds that had never properly healed. That night, I tried to tell Jason. Tried. He listened, asked questions, then frowned when I said I hadn't been invited. "That's strange," he said. "Your dad was just talking about wanting to bring the family closer. Remember that dinner? He said he wanted everyone to go to Jackson Hole this winter." I paused. "Jason, since when do you and my dad talk privately?" He blinked. "Oh, that night. After dinner at the restaurant, he asked for my number, said he wanted to follow up about the startup. You remember, right? I told you." I searched my memory. Had he told me? Or had I been too busy feeling happy to pay attention to the little details? "You're not going to the wedding with me, are you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Can't, babe," Jason replied, eyes still glued to his laptop screen. "That weekend's the Boston Tech Conference. I'm presenting the platform. Big investor crowd." I nodded, lips pressed tight. Then came the emails, week after week, from the live stream service. They sent setup instructions, recommendations for the at-home experience, from which wine to pair with the ceremony, to which tissues were best for emotional moments. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel humiliated. At the same time, Jason became unusually busy. Every evening was spent fine-tuning slides. "If I close this deal," he said, eyes glowing, "we might finally have the down payment for that lake house we liked." I forced a smile. Forced myself to believe. Forced myself not to let the growing doubt spread any further inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that, once again, I was on the outside looking in, watching my family throw a celebration where my name didn't even make the list. Only this time, things were about to take a turn none of them could have predicted. And I, the one they had erased, was going to write the ending. Madison's wedding day arrived on a blazing July afternoon. My whole street seemed to hold its breath in that particular kind of summer stillness. I woke earlier than usual, not from excitement, but because sleep had abandoned me long before the sun came up. I made coffee, sliced a few oranges into a water pitcher, then I stood alone in the living room staring at the television. Right on time, I opened the link from the email. Soft music played immediately. The first image was a sweeping aerial shot, drone footage gliding over my father's luxury estate in Napa Valley. Manicured lavender rose flanked the entrance drive. On the right, a perfect oval pool sparkled in the sun. On the left, white canopies shaded long banquet tables in the garden. I took a deep breath. I'd once imagined that if I ever got married, maybe I'd pick this very place, where Grandma Evelyn used to grow roses along the wooden fence, where I used to run barefoot as a child, before I was sent to live with her. But today, everything had been prepared for someone else. I put on a navy blue dress, added pearl earrings, and tied my hair up neatly. If I had to witness betrayal, the least I could do was not look pitiful doing it. I sat alone in my small apartment, turned the TV to widescreen mode, placed a bottle of white wine on the table, and turned up the volume just enough to hear birdsong layered with the buzz of conversations. Familiar faces appeared one after another. Aunt Judith, my mom's cousin, who had posted en route to the wedding yesterday, was now mingling with guests. Just last week, she messaged me saying she had sinusitis and couldn't fly. Uncle Robert, who once called me his favorite niece, now stood in the reception area with his arm around Harriet, laughing and chatting. I hit pause, sat up straighter. A bitter wave surged in my throat, sharp like old medicine. Then, something flickered in the corner of the screen and I nearly dropped my wine glass. Jason. He was right there in the third row, beside a silver-haired man I didn't recognize. Wearing the gray suit I had helped him choose for what was supposedly the Boston Conference. Jason sat down, smiling, chatting casually, completely unaware that a camera had zoomed in on him. I stood up. One hand gripped the back of the chair, the other trembled as I held the remote. I paused the screen and zoomed in. There was no mistaking it. It was Jason. Not a look-alike, not someone vaguely similar, it was him. The man who once knelt and proposed to me in this very living room. The man who told me he loved me, in that deep voice I had believed was genuine. My throat tightened. He wore the navy blue tie I had bought for him on our first business trip to Portland. He wore the Tag Heuer watch my father gave him last Christmas. He was seated between Harriet and Natalie, my half-sister, who hadn't looked me in the eye in years. They were all smiling, shaking hands, clinking glasses, while I, the one pushed out, sat like an outsider in a one-bedroom rental in the middle of Seattle. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, to come up with some explanation. Maybe Jason had been invited last minute? Maybe he'd been pressured? Maybe... No. I couldn't keep making excuses for them. Not after everything I had just seen. I turned back to the TV. Madison was stepping out of the main house. Her makeup was flawless, hair swept into an elegant updo, and her dress was a classic lace-trimmed gown. The one tying the ribbon on her dress was Harriet, and around Harriet's neck was the sapphire necklace. My heart sank. I stepped closer to the screen, examining the deep blue teardrop gem glinting in the sunlight. I remembered it perfectly. It was the necklace Grandma left me, the one she wore to every significant event. I still remembered the day she unhooked it, placed it in my hand, and said, "One day, when you find someone who truly loves you, wear this at your wedding." I had carried that memory for years like a silent promise, and now the one wearing it was my father's second wife, the woman who always called me his other daughter. I walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and grabbed my phone. I pulled up the live stream again, froze the screen at the moment Jason stood and clapped as Madison and Jackson exchanged rings. I took a screenshot. Another one as Harriet turned, the sapphire gleaming at the center of the frame. I opened my messages and quickly typed to Jason. I saw you at the wedding with my family in the suit I bought you. Don't lie anymore. Message sent, delivered, no read receipt. I messaged my father next. You invited my fiancé to the wedding, but not me? No response. Finally, I texted Madison. Thanks for the link. Seeing Jason slip that ring on you was unexpected. The scene notification appeared 2 minutes later. Madison started typing, then stopped, then started again, then deleted. No reply ever came. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the couch. The room spun around me. I had no idea how long I stayed like that. All I knew was that by the time I stood up, I wasn't the same person anymore. Some truths, once seen, can't be unseen. Some betrayals, once exposed, can never be forgiven. I picked up my laptop and created a new folder, Truth, Phase 1. And I began to write down everything I had seen, every lie, every detail I had once dismissed as coincidence. That frozen image on the screen, it didn't just capture a moment, it opened a labyrinth. And this time, I wasn't turning away. I couldn't sleep that night. The sounds outside my apartment gradually faded after midnight, leaving only the wind whistling through the window cracks and the dim glow of the streetlight casting shadows on the ceiling. But inside me, everything was still moving. Chaotic, tangled, stretched tight like a wire about to snap. The paused live stream played over and over in my mind like a photograph stuck on glass. The more I tried not to look, the clearer it became. Jason smiling, Harriet wearing my grandmother's necklace, Madison holding my father's arm. Each one placed as if cast in a play I was never given a role in. The next morning, I made my coffee extra strong, drew the curtains open to let the sunlight flood in, and got to work. I opened my laptop and created a new folder on the desktop. I named it Truth, Phase 1. Inside, I opened a spreadsheet. Each column was a timestamp. Each row an action, a quote, a detail I had once seen or heard. Things I'd brushed off before now glared back at me with new meaning. There were more than I expected. The time Jason said he had an urgent meeting and left before dawn. The time Harriet sent me a birthday card, even though she hadn't done that once in the past 8 years. The time my father called to ask if I'd reconsidered coming back to work for the family business and chuckled when I declined. I cross-checked each instance with emails, photos, texts. Jason and I had always shared a cloud storage account. It had started as a convenience, but now it became an invaluable archive. He hadn't been careful. I opened his calendar. The familiar interface came up. On the surface, the entries looked professional. Investor pitch, team call, beta test. But I clicked into each one, scrolling down to the private notes section. Dinner /RT at Clubhouse. Meet Harriet Ree, family equity structure. Age Jackson and Richard. And he signed. I held my breath. Richard, that was my father. And Harriet didn't work with Jason. Jackson was Madison's fiancé. Took screenshots of every detail, every line of text, names, meeting times. Then I opened his email. In the archived folder, I found a thread between Jason and a corporate address, richard.taylor@millerdevelopments.com. The first email was from nearly 8 months ago, right around the time Jason started talking about financial pressure and seeking strategic investors. We need assurance that Jordan has no intent to contest Evelyn's estate. Monitoring her response is critical. In exchange, your company will be prioritized in the upcoming digital transformation package. I read it over and over, every word burning away what little trust I had left. It wasn't just that Jason had been bought, or that my family excluded me from every major event. This was a coordinated scheme, months in the making, designed not just to shut me out, but to completely neutralize me. I reopened an old email sent from an unfamiliar address 3 months ago, titled Regarding Evelyn. At the time, I skimmed and deleted it, thinking it was spam. But now I opened it again. The sender was a woman named Deanna, noted as former nurse for Evelyn Taylor. In the email, she wrote that Evelyn had asked her to forward the old version of her will to her granddaughter Me, but never received a response. She wrote, "I don't know if you ever got that file, but I have a backup PDF. Evelyn was very clear that the house in Bend and the sapphire jewelry were meant for you. I still have the file and can send it if you'd like." I replied immediately, attaching my phone number, requesting an in-person meeting. She called back within minutes. Her voice was a little raspy but warm and sincere. "Jordan, I figured you didn't use that email anymore. Are you okay?" "Hanging in there," I said. "Do you still have the old will?" "Yes." Evelyn signed it in front of me and her personal attorney. Every asset was specified clearly, but then, just a few weeks before she passed, Richard brought in a different team of lawyers. I wasn't allowed in the room for 2 full days. "Are you willing to meet me in person? You want to see the documents?" "I need more than that. Are you willing to testify if necessary?" Diana was silent for a few seconds. Then she replied, "If that's what Evelyn would have wanted, then yes, I will." I thanked her, my voice nearly cracking. After the call, I opened my map and pinned the location. Then, I wrote a note. "Meet Deanna, original will evidence." I went back through every screenshot, every email thread, every calendar entry. Each detail was like a brick fitting into a larger blueprint, a web of deceit woven by my family, with Jason as the final thread. I didn't know exactly what I was walking into. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I was the one holding the key. And I knew this was only the beginning. 2 days after my call with Diana, I drove to a quiet neighborhood in North Tacoma where she lived with her daughter. A light rain fell over Seattle. The kind of slow, persistent drizzle that lingered like memories that wouldn't fade. I parked in front of a small, ash-gray house, with a lavender planter on the porch and an old rocking chair. Diana opened the door before I could even ring the bell. "You have Evelyn's eyes," she said, smiling gently as she reached for my hand. "The kind that hold pain without letting it destroy you." I didn't know what to say. I just squeezed her hand softly and stepped inside. She led me to the dining table, where a thick envelope, a printed stack of documents alongside a PDF copy, and a flash drive were already set out. This version of the will was signed by Evelyn at home, witnessed by me and her attorney Brad Jenkins, she explained. She made it very clear: the house in Bend, all liquid assets, and the sapphire jewelry were to go to you. Richard's share was limited because she said, and I'm quoting here, "He's good at business, but not good at keeping promises to his daughter." I bit my lip. That last line cracked something open in my chest. After years of feeling invisible, someone had finally seen it. "Why didn't you reach out sooner?" I asked gently. "I did. I sent letters. But about a month after she passed, someone from Richard's law office sent a cease and desist, threatened legal action for disclosing confidential materials. They did everything they could to silence me." I nodded, not surprised. "I'm gathering evidence," I told her. "I'll file a suit if I have to, but more than anything, I want the truth to come out. Not just for me, for her." Diana placed her hand on mine. "I'll help." I left Diana's house just before noon. On the drive home, I called the one person I knew wouldn't dodge my calls, Brad Jenkins, Evelyn's former lawyer. He remembered me, and he had plenty to say. "And after Evelyn died, I was denied access to her original files," he said. "Richard took them back to the firm and said he'd be reorganizing everything. When I asked, he told me she'd changed her mind at the last minute and signed a new will with a separate legal team." Do you believe that? I asked. I worked with Richard's mother for nearly 30 years. He replied slowly. She was disciplined, deliberate. She didn't rewrite her will on a whim, especially not while on strong sedatives. Do you still have anything? Drafts, scans, witness statements, anything legally usable? I do, but I'll only share them if you're serious about seeing this through. I took a deep breath. I don't have a choice anymore. That night, I reopened everything. The original will from Deanna, the emails from Jenkins, screenshots from the wedding livestream, Jason's calendar, the half-written texts. I organized them into a single system, labeled each file, numbered every piece, and added notes. I even created a password-protected website to store all the digitized materials. At the same time, I received an email from Jason. Subject, "We need to talk." I opened it. The message was brief. I'm sorry, I have nothing left to hide. If you want the full truth, meet me. You deserve to know. I didn't respond right away, but I knew this meeting had to happen. Not for reconciliation, but to close a chapter that was once love and now only betrayal. I asked Jason to meet at a small cafe in Capitol Hill, the one I had taken him to the first time he asked about my secret indulgence. I chose the seat by the window so the light would hit our faces clearly. He arrived on time. He looked thinner, his hair unkempt. The familiar eyes now seemed lost. Jordan, he hesitated. I don't expect forgiveness, but I can't live with you not knowing everything. I looked him straight in the eyes. I know my father hired you to get close to me. I know your startup was just a front. I know you were meeting with Harriet and Jackson, not investors. He lowered his head, then nodded. At first, it was about the company. Richard asked me to watch you, to report your attitude about the will. I told myself I'd stop if real feelings developed. But I didn't have the courage. Every time I wanted to come clean, he threatened to cut the funding. The startup would collapse. So you chose the startup over the truth. I chose cowardice, he said, his voice dropping. I lost you, and I deserved that. I went quiet. Part of me wanted to ask, was any of it ever real? But I knew I didn't need that answer anymore. Jason, I'm going public with everything. From the wedding livestream to the fact your startup is being used to launder money for Miller Development. He looked at me without surprise. I understand. And if you need testimony, I'm willing. I looked up. What did you just say? I saved emails, contracts, even the original transfer from Richard to the company account. If it helps you expose the truth, use it. I left the cafe just as the rain began to fall. The relief didn't come from Jason's confession, but from the fact that, finally, I stood face to face with the truth. Without flinching, without making excuses. On the drive home, I opened my phone and typed a simple note on my lock screen. Tomorrow, begin Phase 2. Meet with Samuel Chin, former Miller Group accountant. If you've ever been betrayed by family so deeply you no longer know what's real, leave a comment. I know how much it hurts. And if you're stuck in that darkness, I hope this story can be the small light that helps guide you through. Follow along to keep uncovering the truth with me, because what I was about to find out was even worse than I ever imagined. I met Samuel Chin on a windy Tuesday morning at a small coffee shop off Green Lake, nearly a 30-minute drive from downtown Seattle. He was the former head accountant of Miller Development, who had left the company 3 years ago due to a difference in strategic direction, according to their press release at the time. But I knew when someone like Samuel reached out after years of silence, it was never just about direction. Samuel was a lean man in his early 40s, wearing black-rimmed glasses, speaking softly but with clarity. As soon as he saw me, he stood and extended his hand, eyes steady and without pretense. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "I owe Evelyn more than I ever admitted." I nodded. I think I owe her a lot of answers, too. We ordered coffee, and then Samuel pulled a thick folder from his leather bag. "You need to understand, Richard Taylor is extremely calculated," he began. "He never leaves anything raw on paper. Every transaction, every transfer is masked behind legal facades, investment funds, shell companies, or pilot projects. But I was in charge of internal finance systems, and I had a habit of keeping personal reconciliations for my own protection." I flipped through the documents he handed me: bank statements, internal fund transfer summaries, capital contribution contracts. Some bore Harriet's signature, others had Miller Development seal, while several listed a Delaware-based shell company. Samuel pointed to a bank statement. "This is a $1.2 million transfer to a company named North Meadow Ventures. It has no physical office, only a mailing address. From there, the money was broken into smaller transfers into Jason's startup, each under $100,000 to avoid audit flags." I pointed to an adjacent line item: consulting fee for family estate risk mitigation. "What does that mean?" "It's a legal euphemism for payment to monitor the daughter," Samuel replied. I remember clearly when that order came through. I asked Richard outright, "What exactly are we paying for here?" He just looked at me and said, "You don't need to know. Your job is to balance the books." Where my hands tightened into fists. "And this," Samuel continued, pulling out another set of documents, "is the internal valuation of the Bend property. Before Evelyn passed, it was appraised at nearly $3.6 million. After she died, Richard sold it for $950,000 to another company owned by Harriet. 3 months later, that company sold it back to Miller Development for $3.1 million. I sat frozen. "So that means Richard sold the house to his wife at a low price, then bought it back to dodge taxes and bypass the inheritance structure," Samuel said, his voice cool and matter-of-fact. "It was an internal laundering scheme, and you were cut out because your grandmother no longer had a voice." I closed my eyes, trying to hold myself steady. Samuel poured more water into my glass. "What do you need from me?" "I need your testimony, and I need you willing to go public if I take this to court or the media." Samuel nodded. "I've stayed silent too long. Evelyn used to give me homemade cookies every time I audited her place in Bend. I've never met someone so principled and kind. What he did can't just be swept away." I left the cafe with a folder full of evidence in my hands. Cold, lifeless numbers now carried the weight of truth. The truth my father, Harriet, and Jason had worked so hard to bury. That night, I organized all the materials into my encrypted drive, sorted them by category: real estate, financial transfers, will and legal, personal witnesses. Each category had subfolders for originals, PDF scans, and visual evidence. I created a special file named Richard Timeline, listing every shady move he made, from bringing Evelyn home without medical supervision, to funneling money to Jason, to orchestrating Madison's wedding like a PR campaign for the Taylor legacy. I thought I'd seen it all, but I was wrong. 3 days later, Natalie, the half-sister who had stayed silent through it all, sent me a simple message. "I need to talk. I found something you don't know." I called her back immediately. Natalie picked up. Her voice trembled, not at all like her usual icy tone. "I didn't realize Jason was your boyfriend until the live stream froze. I thought you didn't show up because you were mad. Then I saw the message you sent, and I started digging. I did something bad." I didn't say anything. I let her continue. "Last week, I was going through Dad's file box looking for a copy of my diploma. I found a birth certificate. Not mine. Whose was it? A baby girl named Emily Jordan Taylor. Mother, Evelyn Taylor. Father, unknown." I felt my chest tighten. I don't think you were just Grandma's granddaughter. I think she was your mother." I couldn't speak. "Dad always kept that document in a locked drawer. I opened it using the old key from the bookcase," Natalie continued. I know Dad studied abroad and came home late. I was born nearly 15 years after you. Maybe, maybe you were her daughter. Or maybe it's something more complicated. I don't fully understand. I leaned back in my chair. I felt like all the blood had drained from my body. Natalie said softly, "If you want, I'll send you the scan. I don't know the whole truth, but I think you deserve to know." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Send it. Send me everything you found." Well, on the other end, she let out a long breath. "I'm sorry, I don't understand it all, but I think you have the right to know who you are." I stared at the ceiling. The apartment was pitch dark, only the faint hum of the heater in the background. One question echoed in my mind. Simple, but devastating. If Richard wasn't my father, then who was I? And what had I lost without even knowing I ever had it? A week after that conversation with Natalie, I sat at my laptop, fingers on the keyboard but unable to type a single word. On the screen was the scanned birth certificate Natalie had sent. An old document, faded official stamps, ink from a typewriter smudged in a few places. Birth name: Emily Jordan Taylor. Date of birth: October 24th, 1990. Mother: Evelyn L. Taylor. Father: not listed. I stared at the words "father, not listed," as if looking long enough would make an answer appear from the void. I had never once considered that I could be Evelyn's daughter. The idea that the woman I called Grandma was actually my birth mother shook every childhood memory I had. Why the secrecy? Why let me grow up under the roof of a man who made me feel like a shadow in my own family? I called Diane, Evelyn's former nurse. "Do you know anything about this birth certificate?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling. There was a pause. Then Diane spoke slowly. "I heard Evelyn mention the name Emily a few times, but she always said it with love and regret. When I asked, she simply said, 'I couldn't give that child the kind of childhood she deserved.'" Thanks. So? Could Richard be my father? I can't say for sure, but she once told me about a major mistake in her youth, and that she handed her daughter over to her younger brother to raise. Her younger brother was Richard. It felt like the air had been sucked out of me. If that was true, then Richard wasn't my father. He was my uncle. I reopened my inbox and scrolled through a long, forgotten email thread between Evelyn and her attorney, Brad Jenkins, from years ago. In one email, she wrote, "I need to include a clause about Jordan's inheritance, clearly stating her rights not as a granddaughter, but as my only daughter. No one is to know, unless I say so." I read that sentence over and over until my eyes stung. A strange feeling grew inside me. Not anger, but sorrow. All those years I thought I'd been abandoned. But in truth, I had been quietly loved in a way society, or even our family, wouldn't let her express. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, turned on every light in the room, and opened the file I titled The Truth Folder. I had everything. The original will with my name on it. Evidence of illegal asset transfers. Money laundering financial records. Internal emails between Jason and Richard. Samuel Chin's testimony. My birth certificate, listing Evelyn Taylor as my mother. I drafted a brief email and sent it to 3 addresses: Richard's lawyer, the notary office where the new will had been drafted, and a reporter in Seattle known for investigating inheritance fraud. I didn't make threats. I didn't declare what I planned to do. I simply attached the documents and stated that I was requesting an official dialogue with legal representation within 10 days. The next day, I received a phone call from Richard himself. "Jordan," he said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "What do you want?" I leaned back in my chair. "I want the truth." "What do you think will happen if it's revealed that you're Evelyn's daughter?" "I think it's time to stop fearing the truth," He was silent for a while, then he asked, "Can we meet? Just the two of us? In private?" I agreed, but under strict conditions, just me and him, in a public place. No Harriet, no lawyers, no manipulations. We met at a small Italian restaurant, the one where Evelyn had taken me for dinner when I turned 18. Richard arrived on time, dressed in a gray suit, looking thinner than the last time I'd seen him. He sat down across from me, avoiding my gaze at first. "Jordan," he said, "we've gone too far." "It's not we, Richard," I replied. "It's you. I'm just trying to find my way back to where I belong." He nodded slowly. His eyes were no longer sharp. They looked sunken, tired. "Evelyn gave birth at 41, he said. At the time, she was a university professor. Being pregnant at that age, unmarried, was a major scandal. She didn't want to give up the baby, but she couldn't raise her either. I was building Miller Development back then, and I agreed to help her keep the secret. In return, she put my name on the guardianship records. From then on, the little girl carried the Taylor name as if she were my daughter. That little girl was me." He looked at me for the first time. "And I never thought it would go this far. You used me as a backup plan. Cut me out of the will, used me to manipulate her emotions, then hired someone to date me just to spy on me." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Harriet never accepted your presence. She always saw you as the extra piece in our family. As for Evelyn, she always wanted to make things right." I looked at him, not with anger, just a deep sadness. "If only you'd told me the truth when she passed. I spent years feeling abandoned by everyone, and the one person who truly loved me, I only dared to call her Grandma." "So smart, Angeline. Grandma." The air between us froze for a few seconds. Then Richard lowered his voice. "This could destroy the Miller name. It could ruin the legacy I built." I placed a manila envelope on the table and slid it toward him. "Inside are copies of all the evidence. I've secured the originals in 3 separate places. You have 2 choices. Either come forward yourself, or let the media and the law do their job." He didn't open the envelope, just stared at it, then at me. "You're not going to stop, are you?" I shook my head. "Not out of hatred, but for justice. For Evelyn, and for myself." Outside, it had started to rain, but for the first time in years, I felt something unmistakably clear inside me. I no longer feared the darkness of the truth. I was Evelyn Taylor's daughter. And I would walk forward carrying my real name. I officially filed a civil lawsuit with the King County Court on a mild, sunny April morning. The case file was nearly 300 pages thick, filled with all kinds of evidence: financial records, legal documents, witness statements, the original will, and even my birth certificate. My attorney, Monica Tran, a sharp and composed Vietnamese-American woman, looked at me through her thin-rimmed glasses and said with quiet certainty, "We're not just reclaiming inheritance, Jordan. We're uncovering a systemic manipulation of legacy, and if we take it all the way, a new legal precedent could be set." I nodded. Not because I wanted to win, but because I knew this was the only way Evelyn's honor could be restored to where it belonged. The moment the lawsuit was filed, a ripple effect began. Local news broke the story first. Top real estate firm Miller Development sued for will tampering and family asset fraud. Within 24 hours, Miller's office was flooded with calls. Harriet disappeared from social media. Jason shut down his LinkedIn and temporarily stepped away from his startup's board. As for Richard, he held a press conference. I watched the live stream, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. He stood at the podium, visibly older. Behind him was a backdrop printed with the Miller Development logo. "I acknowledge," he began, "that during the process of restructuring family assets, some decisions were made that did not align with my mother's original intentions. Evelyn Taylor. Not a single apology, not a single mention of my name. We are fully cooperating with legal authorities to resolve all disputes. I let out a soft, bitter laugh. That evening, I received a message from Monica. NBC wants to interview you. They say your story could launch a new segment called Truth Behind the Legacy. I didn't reply right away. I needed a night to think. The next morning, I walked down to the pier in West Seattle, the spot where Evelyn and I had spent countless hours watching the waves. I remembered her words so clearly. Honor isn't in a name. It's in how you live so others remember you. I agreed to the interview. The filming took place in a modest but elegant studio. The interviewer was an older woman named Margaret Silverhair, a warm voice and eyes that saw right through you. Jordan, are you afraid people might understand that you're suing your own family? I gave a sad smile. I'm not suing out of vengeance. I'm suing for the truth, and for the honor of a woman who was deliberately erased from her own story. What drives you to take this all the way? I looked straight into the camera, so that women like Evelyn are not forgotten, and so that people like me, those who were once seen as the extra Ps, know they have the right to speak up. The interview aired a week later, the same day as the first preliminary hearing. In court, I sat in the front row beside Monica. Across from us were lawyers representing Miller Development. Richard and Harriet weren't present. The judge, a woman likely in her 60s, flipped through each page of the case file, her eyes sharp, missing nothing. There are irregularities in the asset structure. The old will is fully verified. Mr. Samuel Chin's testimony is pivotal, she said. This court orders a freeze on all disputed properties and demands full financial disclosure from the defendants covering the past 3 years. Each word felt like cool water pouring onto a chest that had burned dry for too long. This was no longer a dream, this was reality unfolding. Beyond the media and courtroom, I also began receiving letters from strangers. Women from Arkansas, Ohio, Vermont, writing to me by hand and email. Your story is exactly what I went through 20 years ago. I was removed from a will because I didn't meet my family's expectations. I never dared speak out, but now I'm considering it. I kept every letter in a tin box labeled Silent Companions. On a May afternoon, I returned to Bend, the town where it all began. Evelyn's home had been restored to its rightful heir, and I decided not to sell it. I walked through every room, wiped each picture frame, and rehung the portrait of her in that moss-green sweater standing by the lavender bushes. In the living room, I laid out documents, permits, and interior design plans for my next project, the Evelyn Center for Dignity and Justice, a nonprofit legal advisory center for those disinherited due to bias, discrimination, or family manipulation. I wasn't building that center for revenge. I built it so that the kind of pain I lived through, Evelyn's pain and the pain of so many others forced into silence, wouldn't repeat. Before leaving the house, I stepped into the backyard, where a weathered wooden bench stood. I sat down, closed my eyes, and let the late afternoon sun filter through the leaves. I whispered, "Your daughter has come home. And now maybe you feel like I do, still turning the pieces over. What do you think of my journey? If it were you, would you have stood up against your own family to claim the truth? Do you believe that honor, honesty, and courage can rewrite a legacy that once seemed sealed?" I truly want to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments. Every perspective, every story you bring is part of this shared path of healing and awakening we're walking together. And if you felt this story touch something deep within you, don't forget to follow this channel so you won't miss the next stories, where every family tale holds a twist, a lesson, and sometimes a wake-up call for our own lives.